So again, going back to 19.1, so what, right? So what? Well, the so what here is that we can do things that can improve countries' standard of living, right? So there is in economics what's called a growth consensus. So a wide range of macroeconomists from many different ideologies have shown that statistically, 70% of all differences in income per person is explained by differences in physical capital. So the growth consensus says, well, in order to grow, you need physical capital. Well, how do you get physical capital? Through savings and investment. And this is an important part to keep in mind. It's not enough to just have savings. A bunch of money saved and not done anything with does nobody any good. The money must be mobilized in some sort of productive enterprise. So it must be saved and invested. So I query you this. The United States has one of the lowest savings rates among our peers, or just among the countries writ large. How are we growing given that our savings rate domestically is so low? Investment. We have a ton of investment flowing into the United States from abroad, both in the form of commercial, private investment, but also, what was that thing I talked about? The reserves, right? International reserves. There's a ton of investment coming in from other countries and from other companies into our government because we are seen as the safest bet. We're seen as the most liquid, most reliable issuer of treasury bonds on the planet right now. So, but that is a unique position the United States finds itself in, right? Part of that exorbitant privilege we talked about before. Okay. So, part of improving growth is, it's as much art as it is science, right? And with things like this, we have to look historically to get the best, to do the best ascertaining that we can do as to why countries grew more than other countries. Part of this has to do with the chicken and the egg problem, right? Is it that the savings rate is so low because your growth rate is so low and your country is in poverty? Or is it that your growth rate is so low? Wait, hold on. Is it your growth rate that's so low that's causing your savings to be low? Or is it your savings that are causing your growth rate to be low? So this chicken and the egg problem, right? Like we don't know which one. They reinforce each other, but we don't necessarily know which one causes it, right? And so we look to history. And we're going to talk quickly about two important historical lessons. So the first one we're going to talk about is about the East Asian tigers. The East Asian tigers were middle-income countries that experienced large economic growth over the 1990s, really to today. So how did the East Asian tigers do it? So they were among the heaviest savers in the world. And then they didn't just sit on that savings, right? It's saving and investment. So they took that savings and they used it to build physical capital. They had policies that supported heavy investments in human capital. What are those policies? They're pro-education policies, right? Providing free schooling to both men and women, K through 12, providing subsidized higher education. They sought out applicable and efficient technology. They had policies that supported companies to take advantage of abundant and inexpensive human capital. What good is going to school in order to be a diesel tech if there are no companies that are hiring diesel techs or are repairing diesel, right? So you have to have policies to support companies that are going to then use that human capital. And then one of the big things that they did, especially China and India, is they allowed for far greater freedom for market forces to do their thing. So it was very, very centrally planned before, and they started to loosen the reins a little bit and allow markets and prices to signal where activity should be, rather than them trying to do a study and be like, oh, we need to produce 7 million shoes, so we're going to, give this mandate to this many companies for them to build this amount of shoes, right? They kind of took their hands off the wheel a little bit, allowing the market forces to guide through the profit motive, the entrepreneurial activity, and as a result, they ended up with some of the highest growth rates that we've seen in modern economic history, right? So this is one of them. The other one that I'm going to talk about real quick that the book doesn't talk about, but it's a very interesting paper called from Acemoglu, Johnson, and Robinson, 2001. I will put this as an announcement for the two of you that care. But this paper essentially was trying to figure out that chicken and the egg problem, right? Is it that low growth rates cause, but instead of saving, this one was talking about, do low growth rates cause crappy institutions? Like, is your country's government shitty because you have a bad economy, or is your economy bad because your government is shitty? And the way that they figured that out is they went and they looked at the settler mortality rates from the 1800s. Why the hell did they look at the settler mortality rates from the 1800s? Well, a lot of these countries that they were trying to figure out what was going on with their institutions were previously colonized countries. And a lot of the institutions that were set up in these countries were left over from those colonial powers. And so what they found was that when the settler mortality rate was low, the governments would come in and they would set up equivalent institutions. So the British, in India, set up an English type education system and an English type legal system because a bunch of British people moved to India to settle there. So when the settler mortality rate was low, they mirrored the institutions, and then 200 years later, they ended up having good institutions. When the settler mortality rate was high, it was just extractive. They just went in there, they just took resources, they hired people, and they left. And so there were no institutions built. So high settler mortality rates were the greatest proxy for poor institutional quality today. So the high settler mortality rates 200 years ago is the best proxy for institutional quality today. And they found that it is indeed institutions that are driving growth rates and not the other way around. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. I'll see you all on Wednesday.